I had just set the last fork down when she snapped her fingers. "Like always, wine, please," Rena said without looking up from her phone. "And not the cheap stuff." She was sitting in my chair again, elbow perched, legs crossed, like she owned the air in the room. I stood still for a moment, letting the hum of the ceiling fan and the sizzle from the stovetop fill the silence. The wine bottle was on the counter, chilled, ready. My hand hovered over it. For years, I would have poured it without a word. I'd done it at her baby showers, her birthdays, even on days she didn't bother to say thank you. But this time my fingers didn't move. "No," I said. It came out small, but it was solid. Rena's eyes lifted, sharp and amused. "Excuse me? You've got hands," I said. "Voice even. You can pour it yourself." The air turned dense. Grant looked up from his plate, startled. He blinked like he couldn't believe what he'd heard. And then, without a word, he grabbed the salad bowl, ceramic, heavy, white with a blue rim, and hurled it straight at me. The impact was swift and loud. The bowl shattered against my cheekbone, a sharp sting followed by warmth trickling down my face. I didn't scream. I didn't fall. I just touched my cheek, looked at the blood on my fingertips, and exhaled. Rena smirked. "Servants should know their duties." Grant didn't say a word. He sat back down, picked up his fork, and dug into his plate like nothing had happened. I walked to the sink, picked up a napkin, pressed it to my cheek. The tile under my feet felt cold, steadier than anything else in the room. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I sat down at the far end of the table, napkin soaking through. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. The silence around me didn't crush me this time. It cleared a space I hadn't touched in years. Upstairs, I knew there were bandages in the linen drawer. I moved up the stairs slowly, my palm pressed to the cut, the napkin already soaked through. The hallway felt longer than usual, each step echoing off the walls. In my room, I closed the door with a soft click and slid the lock into place. Only then did my hands begin to shake. The mirror above my dresser caught me off guard. A thin crimson line ran down my cheek, the edge of it swelling already. I turned the faucet on and let the water run until it cooled. With slow, steady movements, I cleaned the cut, watching the diluted pink swirl down the drain. Rena's laugh drifted up through the vent, light and careless, like nothing had happened. Grant's footsteps came later, heavier, hesitant. A knock once, then again, harder. "Mom, open up. I didn't mean— Look, I'm sorry." His voice was muffled, edged with a nervous tremor. I pressed my ear to the wood but stayed still. Another knock. "Please just talk to me." I stepped back from the door, the towel still in my hand. My silence stretched between us, thicker than his apology. His footsteps retreated, then faded altogether. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled my phone from the nightstand, and opened the camera. The flash popped once, twice, 3 times, each click, a small anchor, bruised cut, blood on my fingers, evidence, proof. I saved them all to a hidden folder. Then I reached under the dresser where I kept my small tin box of things no one ever touched, old keys, a thumb drive, and a spare cable. I connected it to my laptop, fingers steadying as I moved through the home security files. The footage was there, clear, unedited, time-stamped. Grant's arm, the bowl, my face, Rena's smile. I copied it to the drive and slipped it back into the tin box. Outside, the house had gone quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge downstairs. I closed the laptop and seated on the floor by my bed. I stared at the ceiling for a long moment, listening to my own breath before reaching for the drawer where I'd hidden Violet's old business card. I found the card exactly where I left it, tucked between a recipe for peach cobbler and a grocery list I never finished. Violet Jennings. She used to run a little craft co-op on Hawthorne Street back when I still had something of my own, before I became Sylvia, before I became Mom. "Can you help me? Can you just watch the baby real quick?" Her email was still valid. I typed slowly. "Violet, it's Sylvia. I know it's been years. I'm reaching out because I might be ready to pick it back up again. The stationery, the cutting, the brushwork. Would love to talk." I stared at it for a while, then pressed send. The sun was barely up, but I didn't go back to bed. Instead, I padded downstairs while the house was still asleep. I opened the hall closet and pulled out the old storage box no one had touched in years. It was heavier than I remembered. Inside, beneath layers of old linen and paper scraps, were my tools, my craft knife, still sharp, the self-healing mat, my watercolor pens, dry at first but still usable with a little coaxing, and the delicate edge scissors I'd once used to shape wedding invitations. I spread everything out on the kitchen table, the same table where they had broken me just hours before, and then, in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, buried under expired coupons and warranty slips, I found it. The envelope I sealed 10 years ago when I first bought this house in my name. The deed. My name, only mine, etched across the top. I pulled out the matching folder of bank statements, every check stub, every utility bill. I traced the lines with my fingers like reading a forgotten language. They said I lived under their roof, but they had forgotten who paid for the roof, the walls, the food. The house didn't belong to them. It never had. I stacked the documents beside my tools, then reached for a fresh sheet of cardstock. My hands weren't shaking anymore as I began sketching my first design in years. I started with the linen closet. Not the sheets, they could keep those, but the quilt my mother stitched when I had Grant. The corners were frayed, but her initials were still tucked in the hem. I folded it carefully and placed it in the suitcase. Then I moved to the guest room closet, where I'd stashed most of my art supplies after Rena decided the dining room was too cluttered for company. My brushes, my pressed paper stock, the embossed labels, some yellowed with time, but all mine. I booked the studio apartment just after midnight. Small, furnished, and close to Violet's co-op. A month-to-month lease. No questions asked. I wired the deposit with the savings I'd hidden behind a fake cookbook cover labeled low-sodium recipes. They never bothered to open it. Morning came. I brewed the coffee, set out the eggs. The toast was crisp, not burnt. I wiped down the counters and folded the napkins just like every other day. Rena walked in barefoot, scrolling through her phone. She glanced at the plate. "Make the toast hotter next time. This feels limp." I nodded, not because I agreed, just because it was easier. Grant came in moments later, eyes dull, lips pressed thin. He looked at me once, then looked away. Neither noticed that the family photo above the piano was gone. I'd taken it down the night before, replaced it with a generic beach print from the garage. Neither noticed the missing quilt from the back of the sofa, or that the drawer where I kept the insurance papers no longer held the folder. They didn't notice I'd removed my name from the holiday planning spreadsheet, or that I didn't ask what time dinner would be. I handed Rena her coffee. 2 sugars, no cream. She didn't say thank you. She never did. I folded another napkin, smoothing the crease, my fingers practiced, precise. Then I glanced out the window where the morning sun caught the edges of the duffel I'd already loaded in the trunk of my car. Tomorrow, I would not be here to make their toast. The library opened at 8. I was there by 8:02, with the USB drive in my pocket and a folder of printed photos under my arm. The cut on my cheek had faded to a line of pale pink, almost easy to hide now. But I didn't come to hide. I logged into the public computer, uploaded the files, and printed every frame, freeze by freeze, of the moment the bowl left Grant's hand and shattered against my face. The grainy footage was time-stamped. Rena's expression caught mid-smirk. Grant's arm extended, jaw clenched. My head snapped back. The moment slowed down in stills, but the damage had never been slow. I gathered the prints and slid them into a fresh manila envelope. Then I drove to the station. The officer at the front desk was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses perched low and a voice like gravel. She listened without interrupting as I laid the file in front of her. She flipped through the photos, her eyes narrowing at the 4th one. "You want to press charges?" "Not yet," I said quietly. "But I'd like to file an official report and request a restraining order." Her pen paused. "Against your son?" "Yes." She studied me for a moment longer. "Most people don't wait this long." I looked down at my hands, folded neatly in my lap. "Most people don't believe it will happen to them." She nodded once and began typing. The paperwork took an hour. She photocopied my ID, stapled everything together, and handed me a stamped copy. "Temporary order issued, hearing date pending." I thanked her and walked back into the crisp daylight, the weight of the folder in my hands, both heavy and liberating. I didn't cry, I didn't shake. I drove back to my new apartment, where the sun was pouring through the window and the smell of old wood and lemon polish reminded me of the craft shop Violet once ran. There was work to do, not just with paper, but with truth. Violet waved me over before I even stepped fully into the lot. Her silver hair was pinned in a loose bun, her apron splattered with paint. The small craft market buzzed around us, tents flapping gently, children tugging on parents, and the scent of cinnamon from the kettle corn stand nearby. "You showed up," she said, her arms open. I hadn't realized how badly I needed a hug until I felt hers. "I brought some things," I murmured, lifting my small box of stationery. She didn't even glance inside. "You've got a corner of my table, right between the beeswax candles and the hand-knit bookmarks, and this." She slipped a key into my palm. "Just in case. The condo's empty until June." I closed my fingers around the key. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Sell something." She winked and turned back to her booth. I set out my cards slowly. Most were blank, but I'd written messages in a few. One read, "Healing doesn't require permission." Another said, "Sometimes closure looks like walking away." They weren't flashy, but they were honest. An older woman with a wool scarf paused, picked one up, and ran her thumb over the edge. This feels like truth," she said. I nodded. She bought 3. By noon, I'd sold a dozen. People didn't ask many questions. They just read, paused, and pulled out their wallets. Violet handed me a thermos of coffee and a muffin wrapped in wax paper. "You're glowing," she said, nudging my elbow. I hadn't realized I was smiling, but it was there, quite small but real. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like someone's shadow. I wasn't a server. I wasn't a problem to be fixed. I was a woman at a table selling something she'd made with her own hands. That evening, I drove home with $48 in a tin and a key in my pocket that didn't belong to anyone but me. And the next morning, I bought more paper. They called it a family meeting, but it felt more like a setup. Rena was already seated at the head of the dining table when I walked in, arms folded, lips pursed. Grant stood behind her, shifting from foot to foot like he couldn't decide if he was leading or hiding. I sat in my usual seat, the one I'd taken for years, the one I'd nearly forgotten was mine. Grant cleared his throat. "Mom, we've been talking, and your behavior lately has been really concerning." I didn't respond. I let him keep going. "You've been distant, cold. Rena feels unsafe with you in the house." Rena added quickly, "You slammed a door in my face last week. That's intimidation." My cheek still bore the faint trace of their last attempt at rewriting the truth. Grant's voice hardened. "We think it's best if you transfer the house to our name. We'll take over the upkeep. You can live here as long as you need, but legally it should be ours. It's simpler." I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. I didn't say a word at first. I laid it all out one sheet at a time, photos of the gash on my face, a still frame from the security footage, bowl midair, the printed deed with my name on it, and a certified letter from my attorney with bold letters at the top. "Notice to vacate, 30 days. Rena's eyes flicked over each page like they were catching fire. Grant paled, reaching for the footage still. "You recorded us?" he asked, incredulous. "You hit me," I replied quietly, and she watched. Rena leaned back, mouth slightly open. I folded my hands. "You have 30 days to leave. My lawyer will be in touch." Grant's voice cracked. "You're overreacting." I stood. "No, I've just stopped underreacting." And I walked away, not with fear this time, but with finality. By the following week, the paperwork was signed and stamped. My lawyer, Margaret, handled the filing with a steady professionalism that didn't flinch when I asked her to request an emergency enforcement order. I provided her with the deed, the footage, the medical report, and the police file. She nodded as she flipped through the folder. "You've done your homework," she said. It took 48 hours for the judge to approve the motion. The locks were changed that same afternoon. I watched from the front steps as the locksmith worked, his drill loud and final. When he handed me the new keys, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt safe. That night, I slept in my own bed without fear. By the end of the week, the consequences began to ripple. A reporter dug into the court filings, public record, and wrote a short but sharp piece for a local news blog, promising finance executive named in domestic assault dispute. They didn't name me, but Grant's employer recognized the details. He was asked to take indefinite leave pending investigation. Rena's unraveling came differently. Screenshots of her texts and a summary of the incident surfaced on a community forum. A former co-worker added, "She used to brag about putting his mother in her place." It spiraled. Within days, her part-time contract was suspended. They knocked once after that, just once. I didn't open the door. I didn't respond to the reporters either. One camped outside with a camera and questions about the viral clip. I made no comment. My silence said enough. Inside, I brewed coffee in my kitchen, barefoot and unhurried, while the world outside finally saw what I had long endured. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat. I just picked up my watercolor brush and dipped it into soft blue. A new batch of cards needed drying, and the studio shelves were nearly empty again. Tomorrow, I'd meet Violet at the co-op. Today, I just wanted to breathe. The apartment wasn't much, just one bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and creaky floorboards. But the silence was mine. I set down the second-hand coffee table I'd found on clearance and ran my fingers across its rough edge. It would be my new workbench. My old one had been in that house, the one I no longer called home. I sold it 2 weeks after the locks were changed. A young couple with 2 toddlers bought it. I left the flower beds intact, but nothing else. I kept no keys, no ties, no trace. In this space, I opened a fresh sketchbook. I sorted my cardstock, tested my watercolor pens, and photographed 5 designs for my Etsy store. I named it something simple, Rooted Paper. Orders trickled in. Then surprisingly, they surged. Sympathy cards with quiet truths. One said, "Healing doesn't ask for permission." Another, "Silence is not surrender." Violet helped me package them at the condo when my hands cramped. "This is good," she whispered one evening. "You're making something that matters." A local paper reached out after seeing the cards at a weekend market. I agreed to a short interview, but asked to leave out certain names. The article came out under the title, 63-year-old survivor turns scars into art. They included a photo of me, gray streaks in my hair, hands steady over painted paper. Below the byline read, "Sylvia, artist, not servant." Orders doubled that week. I rented a post office box. I added a handwritten note to each envelope. I slept better. I laughed harder. I bought fresh lemons for the windowsill, not to serve, but to slice into water. I drank alone on purpose. When the sun dipped each evening, I'd light the small lamp over my workstation and sketch by its amber glow. No one snapped their fingers. No one watched from the hallway. And one morning, the mail held a letter with handwriting I knew too well. The envelope from the mailbox lay on my table for hours before I opened it. The handwriting on the front belonged to Grant. Inside was a single page. The ink blotched where his pen must have paused. "We lost everything. Just talk to me, Mom." No apology, no acknowledgement, just a plea written like a demand. I folded the letter once and set it aside without answering. The door they'd left open for their control no longer led anywhere. That week, my Etsy balance cleared for the first time. Orders had piled up faster than I could ship them. I went to the local women's shelter and handed over an envelope with part of my first month's profit. The director squeezed my hand. "You'll help someone escape sooner," she said. My cheek had healed by then, the faint line hidden beneath my hair. The bruises were gone, but the memory of them no longer felt like a weight. It felt like a map. Each stroke of my brush carried a steadiness I didn't have before. I began a new series of cards. Late one night, the window cracked open to let in the city air. On thick ivory paper, I wrote a single line in indigo ink. "Your silence saved someone." I pressed a fern imprint beside the words and let it dry. The card looked like a small prayer, but it was also a declaration. I sealed the first copy in an envelope for the shelter's notice board, then stacked the rest for my shop. The smell of fresh paper filled the room. I sipped my coffee and leaned back, watching the lamplight settle across my new table. Outside, footsteps passed on the street and faded. My door stayed locked, but for the first time in decades, it wasn't to keep myself in. It was to keep everything else out. I picked up my brush again and began another card. Weeks passed quietly. I settled into a rhythm that felt both fragile and fierce. Mornings began with coffee and soft jazz on the radio. Afternoons blurred into paint and paper, and evenings closed with a notebook full of new ideas. Sometimes Violet dropped by unannounced, her arms full of fresh flowers or thrifted supplies. She'd talk about the latest craft fair or tell stories from her younger days, and I'd listen with the kind of ease I hadn't known I was capable of. Once, she looked at me over her teacup and said, "You know, Sylvia, peace looks good on you." I smiled. "It feels strange." "Strange just means it's new," she said. "Keep it." And I did. The local paper article spread further than I'd expected. Orders came in from other states. A small boutique in Portland wanted to stock my cards. Another in Denver asked if I'd teach a weekend workshop. I declined the first, accepted the second. The class was small, 8 women, 1 long table, and a shared box of supplies. Most of them weren't there to learn art. They were there to feel something again. I recognized it immediately, that hollow space that aches to be filled with something meaningful. We painted leaves, wrote phrases about resilience and release, and by the end of the day, one woman hugged me tight and whispered, Thank you for reminding me I'm not broken. Driving home that night, the city lights blurred through the windshield. My chest felt lighter than it had in years. Back at my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine, my wine, and toasted the quiet. There were no toasts raised to me that night, no orders barked, no eyes rolling, just silence, and it was perfect. I thought of the old dining table, of the way Rena's fingers used to tap against her phone, of Grant's laugh echoing down the hallway before it hardened into something unrecognizable. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel sorrow, just distance. A wide, merciful distance that finally separated who I was from who I'd been made to become. That distance was my freedom. A few months later, Violet convinced me to share a booth again at the spring fair. I hesitated, then agreed. The morning air was crisp, the sunlight soft across the white tents. My section was small but full, cards, prints, and a framed quote that read, "Sometimes survival is louder than revenge." A little girl, no more than 10, stopped in front of it. "Did you write that?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She smiled shyly. "It sounds like something my mom would like." Her mother joined her, eyes tired but kind. She bought the frame without asking the price. When they walked away, Violet touched my arm gently. "You're changing people," she said. I looked around at the bustling fair, the laughter, the chatter, the smell of cinnamon and paint. "Maybe," I said softly. "But mostly I think I just changed me. Later that afternoon, as the crowd thinned and the sky turned gold, Violet leaned close. "Do you ever think about going back?" I didn't need to ask where she meant. "No," I said, "I've already arrived." That night, I came home and placed the last unsold card from the fair on my desk. It read, "Freedom isn't leaving, it's staying gone." I lit a candle beside it and let the wax run. The flame flickered against the paper, and I watched it glow, soft, steady, alive. The apartment was quiet, but this time, the quiet wasn't empty. It was full. I closed my eyes and let the peace settle, the kind that doesn't need permission, the kind that doesn't ask for proof. It was mine.